The sextant is an elegant technological marvel, having guided countless ships across the sea for over 200 years. It is at the peak of what science can achieve before the transition to the age of space. Even today, some navigators hold on to these devices, some actually are still used, and some simply like to remember how far we've come. Today, we are talking about the sextant, a device that uses the celestial bodies above to calculate the precise location of a ship, anywhere, anytime in the world. But to know the sextant, we must first learn the history of the inventions that led to it, a winding and complicated timeline that spans both around the globe and centuries of time. For millennia, those seeking to explore undiscovered lands had only one guide to make their journey: Polaris, otherwise known as the North Star, our single most important star outside our sun. See, knowing that the position of Polaris is relatively fixed in the sky, explorers for thousands of years have been able to determine their latitude using it. And a quick reminder, latitude runs east to west, but it's used to measure how north or south something is, and vice versa for longitude. In case you struggle to differentiate these two like myself, you can remember it because latitude creates the rungs of a ladder. But back to our ancient explorers. They used the North Star to determine their latitude by a clever method. When positioned directly at the North Pole, the North Star will be in an angle of 90 degrees, or directly overhead. At the equator, the star can be seen directly in front. With knowledge of these two constants, any latitude can be determined by calculating the angle Polaris can be seen at. Now, the question you may have is, how can this be used to navigate oneself? Well, say you are setting sail from London to New York. To make the trip, you'd first have to know that London has a latitude of 51.5 degrees north. Adding to this, say you know that New York's latitude is 40.7 degrees, and you know that traveling west would be faster than going east. With these data points, the sailing's actually rather easy. Starting from London, you will sail directly south until you reach 40.7 degrees using the North Star. From there, you can sail directly west, making sure the correct latitude if needed, until boom, you're in New York. As Pythagoras would tell us though, this method was tedious and not the most optimum route, but it was the best navigators had for thousands of years, and it worked. But how were these ships able to calculate the degrees so accurately? I mean, you walk outside, it wouldn't really be obvious if it's 50 degrees or 40 degrees just looking at Polaris. Well, our explorers used devices, very simplistic at first, but increasingly more complex as science evolved and seafaring demanded it. The Arabs began first in the 9th century, creating the kamal, which consisted of a wooden block tied to a string. By holding the string between the user's teeth and holding the wood out with the bottom portion touching the horizon and the top touching the North Star, this allowed the user to calculate the degree at which the North Star was located at. And it obviously wasn't the most precise method and couldn't avoid specific dangers such as a rocky coast, but it was the best that Arab explorers had at the time. By the 13th century, the kamal had been supplanted by a new invention on the block, the mariner's astrolabe. Large and often cumbersome, these devices, while coming with increased precision, were not perfect, and proved especially difficult to handle. And as the world headed toward the age of exploration, it would not be the astrolabe that guided many souls to every corner of our blue planet. In the 15th century, the quadrant was born in Portugal, one of the countries at the forefront of this age. With some of the most precise calculations and being much easier to make, the quadrant became the tool of navigation for Christopher Columbus, Francis Drake, Ferdinand Magellan, and more. But soon, the quadrant too became supplanted by the backstaff. The age relentlessly focused on innovation, The backstaff offered one major advantage over the quadrant it replaced. It could calculate facing the opposite way as a quadrant. See, by this time period, navigators realized they could not solely rely on the North Star to calculate latitude, but instead were using the sun. Let's backtrack for a moment to the 1400s. While exploring further and further south along the African coast to find a route to Asia, Portuguese navigators quickly realized that as they approached the equator, Polaris appeared to disappear over the horizon. This was likely not ideal for the sailors, as they would have no idea how far north or south they were located. So, Portuguese Prince Henry, who was known as the Navigator, ordered astronomers to discover a way to determine latitude without needing to use the North Star. And their solution? Declination. As the sun moved north and south with the seasons, its latitude could be determined by a quadrant so long as the local time was known to the navigator. And this explains the transition from quadrants to backstaffs. As the backstaff, you could face the opposite direction of the sun to calculate your latitude without damaging your eyes, which likely most would prefer. The backstaff continued to be used until the 18th century, when big things in the world of science yet again led to advancements. This time around, the name of innovation, optics. This was a game changer. In 1731, British scientist John Hadley developed the octant. And yes, it may be a bit confusing to go from a quadrant to an octant, then to a sextant, but hey, that's just what they named it. The octant, named because it reflected 1/8 of a circle, quickly spread throughout the Royal Navy after trials, and following an improvement suggested by Captain John Campbell in 1757, the scale went from 1/8 to 1/6, and the sextant was born. So, what did adding optics mean for navigation? Well, it meant less input from the user, only needing to line up the sun and the horizon during any time of day, and the sextant doing most of the calculation work. Using smoked glass, the user could also once again look directly at our solar system star, rather than facing backwards with a backstaff. It's easy to use in a condition, it's incredibly precise, down to within a half minute, and not only could the sextant assess latitude, but it could measure the speed of two moving ships, determine if an anchor was set using trigonometry, calculate the distance of a known object, even the longitude of the ship, by determining the location of the moon to the more fixed positions of the stars. And that brings us to today. Now, sextants have been mostly replaced by GPS using satellites, but as I mentioned earlier, it still is used and taught on naval ships. It's just a beauty of science, all crafted to fit in the palm of your hands. It's the legacy of incredible devices in their own right. The Kamal, the Astrolabe, the Quadrant, the Octant. It is thanks to these inventions that countless lives survived their journeys across the seas. And I want to leave you on this thought. Humanity is constantly forward thinking, and this just shows it. We're constantly improving. We're a species that thrives on this mentality, and have for our entire existence. So, if you for some reason happen across a sextant, just know you're seeing the relentless pursuit of perfection from an imperfect species. Thanks for watching.